Yes, so I'm delighted to be joined by Dave Rich, who is the author of The Left's Jewish Problem, Jeremy Corbyn, Israel and Antisemitism. You also have a role within the CST, which provides protection to British Jewish communities. I think you said you're the...
Head of Policy.
Head of Policy, yes. So thank you very much for your time. To get started, obviously, the Labour Party has self-evidently got a problem with anti-Semitism. To what extent do you think that's the responsibility of Jeremy Corbyn and the Corbynites?
The anti-Semitism we see in the Labour Party reflects attitudes that have been around in the fringes of the British left for a very long time, but they have come into the mainstream, come into the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And I think that's partly because, rightly or wrongly, fairly or unfairly, these are people who think Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership reflect their views. But also because the current leadership has not really done enough, anywhere near enough, to push these people back out and to make it clear that these views are not welcome in the party.
Do you think that the centre-left in the Blair, Brown, Miliband years were quite naive about the threat from the far left, including anti-Semitism?
I think there was perhaps more tolerance than there should have been, that these ideas that were floating around the fringes were kind of harmless, and that the centre-left did not need to police its borders in that way in terms of making sure these ideas didn't come into the party. But obviously a lot of these ideas, a lot of the people holding these opinions have joined the party in the last 4 years.
So obviously people in the Labour Party or the left Labour Party, they'll say that our interest is Israel, it's not Jews, we're anti-Zionists, we're not anti-Semites. To what extent do you think Israel is the crux of all this? And why did the far left become so interested in Israel?
There's no doubt that for a lot of people, hatred of Israel, an obsessive hatred of Israel, lies at the core of hostility they feel towards Jewish people. And this isn't about disagreeing with Israeli policies or criticising the actions of Israeli governments. It's about an obsessive hatred. But one thing that has been quite shocking, I think, in the last few years is how much of the anti-Semitism we've seen in the Labour Party is really nothing to do with Israeli policies or Israeli actions. It's old-fashioned prejudice about Jewish people. It's old-fashioned stereotypes about Jews being rich and powerful and conspiracy theories, the kind of stuff we used to see from the far right. And all of a sudden now it's popping up in the Labour Party.
And why do you think that anti-Semitism, because as you say, obviously historically you associate anti-Semitism with the far right, why do you think it became such an issue on the left?
There are lots of reasons why it's come into the left. One of them, quite simply, is because people on different political extremes are increasingly learning off each other, especially in an internet age, in a social media age. It's very easy for people from the far left to pick up articles and images from far-right websites, and because they believe in very similar conspiracy theories, they appeal to their view of the world. I think it's also because anti-Semitism, although we associate it with Nazis and with the Holocaust, actually it has a much longer history and a much broader history, and it has occurred in different places where you've had communist governments. It of course occurs in Muslim majority countries as well. So it's a broad-ranging prejudice. It's not just one that comes from the far right.
Do you think the mainstream society, in particular media, have been somewhat naive about the rise of anti-Semitism in British politics?
I think there has perhaps been a complacency about it, largely because Britain is not really an anti-Semitic country. It's not an attitude that is very widespread in the population as a whole. And that's why what we're seeing at the moment, with it becoming more and more prevalent in politics, is so shocking. It's very easy for Jewish people to go about their daily lives and not encounter any anti-Semitism. Unless you go online, or unless you're in the middle of these arguments that are going on with the Labour Party. So I think it's understandable why people didn't really pay it attention, but of course for Jewish people it's always a worry that it's a light sleeper, and if social conditions change then anti-Semitism can spring up again very quickly and become quite dangerous.
Do you think that over the last 4 years, acknowledgement of anti-Semitism, acknowledgement of an issue has increased, and the reaction has been appropriate to the problem, as it were?
There's no doubt that awareness of what anti-Semitism is has definitely increased in the last few years. More and more people are aware of its existence and also want to know about it and learn about it and understand that racism can affect Jewish people still in this day and age. So that is something you could see as a positive consequence of everything that's happening, because it also reflects the fact the problem is getting bigger.
Yeah. Now, obviously, a lot of people say that the problem may go all the way to the top. When Jeremy Corbyn has been called a racist anti-Semite to his face by his own, or one of his own MPs at least. Several of his own MPs have quit and said they were part of the institution anti-Semitic. Do you think that Jeremy Corbyn personally harbours any anti-Semitic views, or at least used to?
There's no doubt that Jeremy Corbyn has said and done things in the past that could reasonably be described as anti-Semitic, and these are all on record. Some of the conspiracy theories about Israel that he's endorsed, which really match up to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The way he referred to British Zionists who were born in this country but can't really be English. Now, whether he really has anti-Semitic views that he's aware of, whether you could reasonably call him an anti-Semite, that's another question. He's a politician. I'm not really that interested in what his deepest feelings are about Jews or about anyone else. Politicians need to be judged on what they say and what they do. By that measure, I'm afraid he has been found wanting.
I mean, do you think the Labour Party's problem with anti-Semitism can be cured under Corbyn's leadership?
Well, so far the evidence would suggest not, because the Jewish community has been asking for some pretty straightforward measures to be taken in terms of the disciplinary process, in terms of him showing leadership, personal leadership on this issue, and various other measures, and none of them have happened. And there is a sense that the institutional anti-Semitism that exists in the party, this anti-Semitic culture, goes all the way from the grassroots to the top. Now, I'm not one to say nobody can ever change, and as long as he's the leader, the buck stops with him. And it is his responsibility to deal with this problem. If he goes and another leader comes in, it will be that leader's responsibility, and maybe they'll do a better job.
Oh, so you think it's become like a cultural issue within the party?
If you speak to Jewish members of the Labour Party, or increasingly former members of the Labour Party, because these are people who've left, and they talk about the bullying and the abuse that they've experienced in local Labour Party meetings or in Labour Party Facebook groups and those kind of internet spaces, it does suggest there's a collective attitude, a political culture in which a lot of Jewish party members have felt that they've been discriminated against or abused or harassed because they're Jewish. And that speaks to a political culture in the party. This isn't just about a finite number of people who have bad attitudes, and if you throw them out, everything will be fine. It's deeper than that.
I mean, how shocked were you, because obviously there's a recent revolution via leaks to, I think it was the Sunday Times, or say one of the Times, that the leader's office had been intervening in certain anti-Semitic disciplinary cases. How much did that surprise you?
Sadly, it didn't surprise me. And that, I think, is a sign of how bad the situation is. It's shocking that it happened. And it's shocking that the disciplinary process is so obviously being obstructed and corrupted by that kind of political interference. But I think, having seen everything we've seen over the last 4 years, and having seen the real lack of engagement with the Jewish community and lack of interest in actually dealing with this problem, when these revelations came out, however shocking it was, no one should have been that surprised that it was going on.
And obviously a number of Labour MPs have now quit the party, or former Labour MPs have quit the party of anti-Semitism, and accused the party of being institutionally racist, institutionally anti-Semitic, including Luciana Berger. I mean, do you think it's fair to call the party institutionally racist now?
I think firstly we have to acknowledge the enormity of a Jewish MP leaving one of our mainstream political parties because of the anti-Semitism she had received from within that party, and her own party had not supported her. It's an astonishing and an appalling state of affairs, and it's not something that should happen in Britain, of all countries. So that's one of the reasons why I think it is fair to say there's an institutional problem in the Labour Party. There is this anti-Semitic political culture. There's no doubt that we've seen this playing out in the formal structures of the party. You look at the failure of the disciplinary process with cases like Ken Livingstone and lots of other cases that are now coming out, the political interference, and this all speaks to a much broader institutional problem.
Do you think there are some on the left who don't treat anti-Semitism quite as seriously, possibly, or at least in some way differently to other forms of racism?
There's no doubt there are some people on the left who I think have a hierarchy of racism in their head and see anti-Semitism as perhaps something that belongs to history because they associate it with the Holocaust, and of course the Nazis were defeated, so they will always oppose the far right, but they're not really alert to other types of anti-Semitism that can crop up. And because there is a stereotype or an image that Jewish people are uniformly white and wealthy and powerful and integrated, which are all stereotypes in themselves, those kind of things in a certain anti-racist viewpoint would lead some people to think, well, Jewish people can't really suffer racism because racism is what happens when minorities are excluded from society, when they're excluded from good schools and good jobs and good housing and so on. Anti-Semitism doesn't quite work that way. It works in a different way.
I mean, how much of an impact do you think the Labour Party's problem of anti-Semitism is having on British Jews?
It's definitely causing a lot of concern, a lot of anxiety in the community, a lot of bewilderment, because the Labour Party were always traditionally the party that stood up to racism. And for most of the 20th century, the Labour Party was the party most Jewish people voted for. So to be in this situation now where the overwhelming majority of Jewish people see the Labour Party as having a problem with anti-Semitism is a completely new and confusing situation for a lot of British Jews. It's also at times unfortunately played out in terms of hate crimes against Jewish people, especially abuse online, which tends to increase when the problem of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is at its most intense and when it's getting the most media coverage. So it's having that kind of day-to-day impact, and of course it causes a lot of concern about the future.
I mean, there was a survey, I think it was a Jewish Chronicle survey, in September last year. It's like nearly 40% of British Jews said they would, I think, seriously consider leaving the UK if Corbyn became Prime Minister. I mean, is that something that you worry would actually happen, but think could possibly actually happen?
I don't know. I think you can sometimes take those opinion polls in different ways. Whether Jewish people now in Britain are asking themselves the question, could things get so bad in this country that we, like our grandparents or great-grandparents, may end up having to leave at some point in the future? That's not an uncommon question. But whether there are Jewish people really planning to leave, I haven't really seen that much evidence of that. We have to see what happens in the future. But I think the problem with that question is ultimately we are British and we are part of this country and we belong in this country. We have a strong Jewish community here, and there's no reason why anyone should be thinking of leaving. I think this is something that we need to take on and fight and win.
I mean, how concerned do you think British Jews are specifically about, obviously, Corbyn's past association with certain terror groups which are clearly anti-Semitic, so Hamas, Hezbollah, there's obviously others as well, and including groups which have been active in the UK? I mean, do you think that's a real big concern?
That's definitely one of the things that has affected how people view him. He has a long history, not just in terms of the Middle East, but on all the issues that he's campaigned on. He has a long history of supporting the more extreme groups in those conflicts or in those campaigns, not the middle-of-the-road compromise-orientated groups, but the groups that have an absolutist and quite extreme mindset. And we've seen that in terms of his approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with the support he's expressed for Hamas and for Hezbollah in the past, with laying a wreath at the grave of Palestinian terrorists in Tunisia. And this all feeds into a lot of concern about what his views really are, and a lot of questions about if he was in power, what would that entail?
I mean, when you speak to a lot of Corbyn supporters, they say, yes, there is racism in the Labour Party, there is anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but the same is true across the board. And obviously the Tories have a problem with racism as well. I mean, do you think it's comparable? Do you think it's on the same sort of level? Do you think the Labour Party stands out at the moment?
Obviously, racism and bigotry of all types exists across society, and you will find it in every political party. I think the issue for us is the experience that Jewish Labour members and former Labour members have actually had. These are people who've been members of the party for a very long time and have felt compelled to leave because of what they've experienced in those parties, in that party. And if you combine that with Jeremy Corbyn's own personal record, I don't think there's anything comparable in any other political party at the moment. I do think we're dealing with a different situation.
I'm assuming you've always set for kind of the very extreme right kind of thing.
Well, I'm talking about mainstream political parties. I don't consider the very extreme right to be political parties. They're something different, really.
I mean, if Corbyn, or more likely some future Labour leader, wanted to purge anti-Semitism from Labour, or wanted to actually address the problem, what do they have to do?
Well, a year ago, the Jewish communal leadership, the representative bodies of the community, gave Jeremy Corbyn 6 ideas of things he could do in terms of bringing in an independent and mutually agreed ombudsman to oversee the disciplinary process, to have fixed timescales on disciplinary cases, to have an educational programme that could change this political culture we're talking about, to stop MPs like Chris Williamson sharing platforms with people who've been suspended or expelled from the party, and various other suggestions as well. Now, none of these have been done. If these had been done a year ago and done properly with full resources behind them and in good faith, then we may well be in a different position now. But I think repeatedly what we've seen is a rejection of these suggestions and a rejection of meaningful engagement with the Jewish community. And that's what's brought us to where we are.
I mean, do you think if Labour had a new leader who was genuinely, utterly committed to combating anti-Semitism, say someone like Tom Watson, do you think the party would still have a problem with this for a long time, or do you think it could be kind of brought back to the kind of level it was under Miliband relatively quickly?
Look, I'm an optimist. Things can always change, and with good leadership, things can always change. And I think if a new leader came in, or if the current leader, as I say, anyone can change, took these steps, took on the issue in a genuine way, showed really strong, committed personal leadership, not just with the odd statement here or there, but in the detail as well, then of course organisations and institutions can be turned around. It can take a long time and it needs a big commitment, but things are never set in stone. All organisations can change.